joining us either in person or on Zoom. My name is Gavin Cleespies, and I'm the Director of Programs, Exhibitions, and Community Partnerships for the Massachusetts Historical Society. Our program this evening will trace the development of the celebration of Christmas from the time it was outlawed in the 17th century New England through the beginning of the 21st century. Many of the customs we take for granted today as part of our current celebrations were actually relatively recent additions to this pantheon. We'll hear about how Christmas was transformed from a rowdy celebration into a family-centered event, how Christmas trees became popular, and how Santa Claus came to town. Our speaker this evening is Ken Turino. He is the Manager of Community Partnerships and Resource Development at Historic New England. He oversees community engagement projects throughout the region and curates exhibitions at the Sarah Orne Jewett Museum and Visitor Center and the Langdon House. His films have been featured on PBS, and Ken has published numerous public history articles, many with a focus on interpreting historic sites and on LGBTQ history. Ken teaches in the Museum Studies Department at Tufts University and is currently working on a book interpreting Christmas at historic sites and museums. Before we begin, I would like to extend a special welcome to our members and donors. In normal years, we would have an opportunity to welcome all of you to a holiday party. We're sorry that we aren't able to see everyone this evening, but we hope many of you are joining us online. I'd just like to say how much we appreciate the support of our contributors. You make it possible for us to provide over 60 different programs a year and keep our library open to the public with all of our amazing collections available to researchers throughout the world for free. Thank you all for all of your support. So now, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Ken.
Thank you, Gavin, and thank you all for coming out tonight. And thank you all for those of you attending in Zoom land. Thank you for that nice introduction. And you did really clearly state what I hope to do tonight, and showing how Christmas did transform into the holiday that we know today. So I'm going to dive right into it because we have many centuries to cover and lots of material. I'll be very interested if you have questions at the end, so please, think of those. And I'll have a few questions for you in the audience today. So the celebration of Christmas today is for many the most important holiday of the year. But many of the customs we take for granted as part of the current holiday festivities and religious celebrations actually develop slowly over time. And what I'm showing you some images of the religious celebrations, but I'm going to focus more on the secular celebrations. And what you're looking at is an image of the Réveillon, which was a meal that was held after midnight mass in Louisiana and particularly New Orleans. But we here, especially in New England, and a lot of my talk is focused on New England, derived a lot of our customs traditions from England. Except maybe not so much with Christmas. In the southern colonies, you might have seen a celebration more akin to this, maybe not this, but the original settlers to New England were the Puritans, and they avoided the celebration of Christmas for two main reasons. One is they found the Church of England and English Christmas festivities excessive. And English Christmas festivities, as pictured here, could be excessive. There is no biblical sanction, as I said, and we'll talk more about that, about Christmas as being the day that Christ was born. Now, indeed, in England, these festivities were rowdy. They included exchanging gifts for goodwill, dancing, songs, feasting, begging, and lots of drinking, as you see here. Christmas was an occasion when the social hierarchy itself was symbolically turned upside down in a gesture that inverted designated roles of gender, age, and class. Those near the bottom of the social order acted high and mighty. Men might dress like women, and women might dress and act like men. Here's a scene of mummers from England, 17th century image we're looking at. This persisted, and there is still vestiges of this. Has anyone here been to the Mummers Parade in Philadelphia? No, you have. It's a big drunk. It is just bizarre. But that was more in Philadelphia. We did not see that here in New England. Young people, oops, I think I did something wrong. Young people might imitate and mock their elders. A peasant might become lord of misrule and mimic the authority of a real gentleman. Now, in England, when the Puritans assumed power, the Puritan Parliament made a point of holding regular sessions each December 25th from 1644 through 1656, and did what it could to suppress the traditional observance of the day. Now, in New England, the Puritans were largely successful. Peter Drummy and I were just talking about this. As early as 1621, 1 year after the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, Governor William Bradford on December 25th found some of the colonists out, quote, gaming and reveling in the streets, and he ordered them right back to work. In 1659, the General Court of Massachusetts outlawed the observance of Christmas in the colony, fining persistent revelers 5 shillings. And why are they doing this? Because even though the Puritans are here, reveling did persist. And I did a lot of research in court records, and I found people actually being taken to court. William Hoare was presented for suffering tippling in his house by those who came to keep Christmas there. This is in the Salem Quarterly Court Records of 1662. The ban was not repealed until 1681 by the Massachusetts General Court. Now, this was one of the several laws that were obnoxious to the restored British monarchy, the restored government. The first Christmas services recorded in Boston took place in this building, the Town House, in 1686. If any of you know where the old State House is, this building was the predecessor to the old State House. Now, not everyone was against Christmas. And you can see that in this pamphlet from 1647, where it says, Christmas is sound and good. Now, The Trial of Father Christmas, this book published in 1686, mocks the Puritans who had suppressed Christmas. They had already been out of power. What I like about this book is the Puritan jurors putting Father Christmas on trial bore such names as Mr. Cold Kitchen, Mr. Give Little, and Mr. Hate Good. Now, the Puritans were highly successful in suppressing Christmas. It was still considered a regular workday in the colony during the 18th century, although services were held by certain denominations. In 1719, Judge Samuel Sewell, you see here, cautioned, quote, New England men came hither to avoid anniversary days, the keeping of them, such as the 25th of December. How displeasing must it be to God, the giver of our time, to keep anniversary days, to play the fool with ourselves and others. Now, that same year, this 1719 almanac warned, if you look at the arrow, right around the days surrounding Christmas, do not let your children and servants run too much abroad at night, because they were running abroad at night. A sermon of 1729 by John Barnard states, quote, it looks something odd to select a day and keep it when at the same time they know it was not the day of his nativity. He goes on to say that the celebration was introduced by the Roman Church to please the pagans and to take their festival days and convert them to Christian use. Now, the suppression of Christmas did survive, and here you can see a law drafted by Governor John Wentworth for Portsmouth, because there was still riotous and tumultuous manner going on. There was hallooing, there was a zaying and firing of guns and beating of drums, which many of the inhabitants did not like. Now, I want to go on and talk about some of the earliest customs throughout this talk. One being going back to the Lord of Misrule and going back to the mummers. And that had to do with begging or giving gifts to people. This is the Boston's Carrier's Address from 1770. This broadside illustrates one of the earliest customs still with us today, giving tips to newspaper boys. This is in keeping, as I said, with the European tradition of begging at Christmas. And I'm just going to read you one stanza. It says, "Kind sirs, your generous bounty flow, few shillings on your lad bestow." And what it's looking at, again, it's that you've all heard this song about "I won't go until I get some," song about 50. It's about this begging. I won't go until I get some. So, kind sirs, your generous bounty flow. So giving tips, giving little gifts is in keeping with the British traditions. Now, in the early 19th century, the population grew here, bringing with it a more ethnically and religiously diverse population. The celebration of Christmas depended on your religious affiliation. Congregationals continued to abstain from keeping Christmas. It was in the urban centers that the growing celebration can be seen. Only a small minority of people in rural areas kept Christmas until mid-century. Slowly, signs of the acceptance of the holiday emerge in Salem diarist Dr. William Bentley's writings. On December 25th, 1810, he comments on the growing number of religious services. Quote, "Christmas has a public service in the morning from the English Episcopalians and in the evening from the Universalists. Our congregational church stands fast as they were from the beginning," meaning no observance of Christmas. Now, the debate on Christmas grew. It was discussed in sermons, like you see here, and in editorials in newspapers. An article I found in the Lynn Mirror that was reprinted from the Norwich Courier in Connecticut from December 24th, 1825, shows the changing attitude towards the holiday in New England. Now, I want you to listen to this very carefully, because in this flowery Victorian language, it tells you what were the two biggest holidays in America. So I'm going to ask you to tell me. Listen to this. "When a period approaches so replete with blessings to the whole world, it becomes a religious people to reflect upon the importance of its observation," meaning Christmas. "Shall we, while we celebrate the birthdays of heroes and those in which our fathers shook off with gigantic energy the yoke placed upon us by a foreign power, suffer the period to pass unheeded and unnoticed?" So what were the two biggest holidays in the first quarter of the 19th century, the early republic? 4th of July, right. And thank you, you got it all. Start a bill. Yes, the yoke which we got rid of, and the birthday of heroes, Washington. Very, very good. Now I want to go on and talk about another early custom, and that has to do with greenery. In the first half of the 19th century, with certain denominations, you could find the custom of decorating churches with greenery. Joseph Lye, a Lynn cordwainer or shoemaker, mentions this in his diary entry for December 26, 1819. The church was handsomely draped with green boughs the day previous to Christmas. An 1827 article explains the custom of holly in churches by stating, quote, "Tradition says the first Christian church in Britain was built of boughs because the monks built their temples in that manner, probably to imitate the temples of Saturn, which were always under the great oak. The great feast of Saturn, or the Saturnalia, was held in December, and as the oaks were then without leaves, monks obliged the people to bring in boughs and sprigs of evergreens." And as I've been doing my research, and I'm just showing you scenes from different magazines, this is, I believe, from Harper's, showing you the collecting of greens. This is an 1851 illustration of King's Chapel, showing you the swags of greenery here. And a couple examples of people decorating the churches in the 19th century. This one is in Skowhegan, Maine, St. Stephen's Chapel in Lynn, Massachusetts, and another one from Maine. A small publication, Christmas Eve for the pupils of the South Parish Sunday School, this was published in 1853 in Portsmouth, described the interior of a church as wreathed in evergreens and flowers, Each pillar garlanded with flowers, interspersed with beautiful wreaths and covered with flowers surmounted by an evergreen cross. Art's appearing in houses. So first it's appearing in churches. We know as early as the early 1810s. It starts appearing at Christmas fairs, which I'll talk about, and you start seeing it appearing, but very discreetly, in houses by mid-century. Now, diaries show that December 25th, for most people, remained a working day well into the 19th century. Listen to what Joseph Fly is doing on Christmas. And he writes in his diary, Christmas, helped kill James Phillips' hog. His weight was 583. An afternoon killed our hog, his weight 435. He goes on to mention a marriage taking place that day, Christmas, and the next year, a burial. So it was and did remain a working day. Now I want to go on and talk about Christmas trees. Christmas trees were recorded in America as early as 1810 among German immigrants in Pennsylvania. But it was not until later in the century that it gained popular acceptance. What you're looking at is the first image we have in America of a Christmas tree. It was done between 1812 and 1819 by John Louis Kringle, a German painter who had emigrated to Philadelphia, and it was done in the Pennsylvania countryside. So this is our earliest known image. It's in the Winter Tour collection in Delaware. Now, Christmas trees in America were being promoted as a timeless tradition, but they were a relatively new tradition in Germany itself. They were originally a local custom in the 18th century, and it was not until the 1830s that trees became a national practice there. Their popularization in America was spread in magazines and books. The first, probably a German story, published in a Boston Unitarian magazine, the Athenaeum, in 1820. And it was by reading about Christmas trees, not by witnessing them, that most Americans learned about the customs. So where did they see their first Christmas trees? Well, at the image on the right is actually from a Sunday school. And the image on the left is from a Christmas fair. So it was at a local church fair or Sunday school that most people of the mid-19th century probably encountered their first Christmas trees. Many of these fairs were sponsored by the Unitarians who promoted the Christmas tree and the idea of Christmas in their publications. And you can see this advertisement from Middlebury, Vermont, where they're advertising to people, come to the Sabbath school because you'll see a Christmas tree. This is actually from Lynn, Massachusetts. Come and see the Christmas tree. And then a social hop. I guess a social hop is a kind of dance, I assume. And let's go on and talk a little bit about fairs. Christmas fairs. We're in the season right now of Christmas fairs. This is absolutely the right time. These fairs then and now usually featured baked goods and handicrafts made by the ladies of the church, or in this case, as you're looking, my hometown, last weekend, Nahant, had their holiday fair. In the 19th century, there was usually some kind of entertainment featured. It might be a tableau, like a scene from Dickens' Great Expectations, or one, quote, the Union as it will be after the rebellion is crushed and the chain of slavery is broken. So these Christmas fairs are actually one of the oldest traditions we have associated with Christmas in America. And my research now has gone on to look at female abolitionists and their role in Christmas. The female abolitionist societies made goods in their sewing circles to sell at fairs in their own communities, but particularly the Boston Fair, which was the biggest in the nation. And it was also supplied by goods from ladies in England and in Europe. You can see some of the posters from the anti-slavery fairs. The quilt was an item that was sold on the right. That's in the collection of Historic New England, made by Lydia Marie Child, one of the organizers of the fair. So the female abolitionists actually played a large role in promoting Christmas, and you'll hear more about that in just a bit. So I want to show you the very first printed image we have of a Christmas tree. It was published in Boston in 1836 as the front piece to The Stranger's Gift. It was a gift book written by a German immigrant, Hermann Bochum. And let's just show you a few more images of these trees that made their way from magazines onto trade cards. These early trees were small, usually set atop a table and decorated with toys, candy, fruit, ribbon, garlands, and candles. Now, two images that helped to popularize the Christmas tree are of this couple. Who are they? Got it. Okay, easy. On the left is the London Evening News, 1848. And then it was in the popular magazines in America that spread this like Godey's Ladies book on the right. If you notice, Prince Albert lost his sash in the transformation. But that's how information on the Christmas tree was spread. Boston being a publication center, Boston played a major role in getting the word out on this. Queen Charlotte may have had an earlier Christmas tree. Where was Prince Albert from? Germany. Again, the Germans played a huge role. Joseph Kidder of Manchester, New Hampshire, wrote in his journal in 1851, quote, "Though the tree was thought scarcely more than a day, yet it grew as if by magic and bore fruit in abundance in its season. There were nearly 70 different articles suspended from its evergreen branches, making a very beautiful and attractive appearance." I just want you to notice, gifts were not wrapped. They were hung on the tree. If they were too big, they were put on the table. And if they were still too big, on the floor. And we'll talk more about when gifts become wrapped. Let's go on. Has anyone here actually seen real candles on a tree? Okay. Bill, you have? Kevin? Okay. A couple of people here, and I hope in Zoom land too. This is my friends who are from Austria. They do this every year with real candles. They also go way out because those are sparklers that they turn, that are burning there. The ornaments would be, we'll talk about those in a second, but the candles placed on a tree, let's go back here, just stay here for a second. The instructions for having a Christmas tree, they weren't lit all night. They would be in a room like this. Parents would set it up. They would light the candles. They would let the children in, and they would be lit for a certain amount of time. There would always be a bucket of water, sometimes a bucket of sand in case things got out of hand. And the trees were cut differently, as you've probably already seen in some of those illustrations. So usually a shorter time, and I can tell you, seeing one with real candles is really absolutely stunning and lovely. Now, ornaments at this time were generally handmade. And again, it was in magazines like Harper's Weekly and Godey's Ladies book that instructions like this in here were given on how you could make your own ornaments. It's not until later, in the mid-1860s, that the first glass ornaments appear as imports, and you can guess from where. Germany. Whole towns were devoted to making these ornaments, as you see on the right. They were not sold in sets, they were sold individually with clip-ons. And I just threw in a couple candles so you could see how they could be attached to a tree. Now I want to move on and talk a little bit about St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is going to morph into Santa Claus, perhaps who becomes the most popular secular Christmas symbol. He was readily accepted at a growing number of church festivals during the 1840s and 50s. Now, he had first been introduced to Americans in New York as St. Nicholas, whose feast day is coming up, December 6th, and was popular by Washington Irving in his 1809 Knickerbocker's History of New York. Knickerbockers and New Yorkers played a major role in the popularization of Santa Claus. And what I want to show you now is one of the earliest illustrations we have of Santa Claus. And this is from an 1821 poem, The Children's Friend. It's 12 pages long. And I'm going to show you lots of images of Santa Claus I want you to look at closely. Santa Claus's place as a uniquely American icon was assured by the publication you see on the right in 1823 of New Yorker Clement C. Moore's on the left, an account of a visit from St. Nicholas. This charming poem, written for his children, helped to popularize the image of St. Nicholas flying through the sky with reindeer on Christmas Eve, leaving presents for good boys and girls. This was popularized as an old Dutch tradition, but in reality, it was an invented tradition. And I want to show you, again, these images. This is a painting of the New York Historical Society from 1837. And look closely at these. This was the first visual representation of St. Nicholas to be widely distributed, and it's a woodcut that was in the 1841 New York paper Brother Johnson. And I was in New York a few years ago for the New York Antique Show, and I found this from a riverboat that was on the Hudson. And clearly you saw where they got their inspiration. Now, in his poem, Moore managed to invoke the integration of the social classes in a scene of shared festivity where the poor posed no threat of rowdiness and gratefully accepted their place. Now, we talked about the Puritan feeling here in New England, but in New York, and I've already mentioned Mummers in Philadelphia, it was a very different situation, and rowdiness tended to be quite common. So look at these other images of Santa Claus. Is anything striking you? Yeah, I mean, look at this one. He's tall, he's blonde, he's playing a fiddle, he's got no beard, clean shaven. This is one of my favorites, this illustration, because he's not being driven by reindeer, but by a turkey. And I think that he looks like he's drunk all the wine that's in those bottles you see at the very front of the image, because he looks a little soused to me. The point is, and here, even the costume, red? No. These are two trade cards from Boston. Santa Claus's image is going to change over time. And these are some images from the first book-length edition of A Visit from St. Nicholas under Moore's name. Moore does, give us most of what Santa Claus is supposed to be doing, like going down chimneys, right? And using a sleigh with reindeer. He's portrayed as a plebeian, and it says in the poem, he looked like a peddler and a jolly old elf. Well, it's this gentleman, Thomas Nast, and this is his first cartoon of Santa Claus. It was done in 1863. That is really gonna cement our image of what Santa Claus is gonna look like. So he's not gonna look elf-like. He's not gonna be clean shaven and young with blonde hair. He's gonna evolve. Here's Santa Claus with, don't ask me why, but Bo Peep in 1879 with another Thomas Nast. Over time, Santa Claus would lose his plebeian character and become large and jolly until you get here. This is the famous image of 1881 by Nast showing Santa Claus with what we want today, with the pipe. Look at those cheeks, the beard, the big belly, jolly. That's what we expect. He evolved over time. And it was Nast who gave Santa a North Pole address. And Peter, don't answer this one. Does anyone know where in the literature it said Santa lived before Thomas Nast gave him the North Pole? Anyone? He lived in Spain. Why not? Good climate, good food, good wine. If you read Washington Irving, Santa Claus was in Spain. The decades from 1850 to 1870 saw Christmas become firmly established as the most popular holiday of the year. Quote, Christmas seems to be growing in favor with the people, began an advertisement for Herbert's in 1841. Although resistance to these developments still lingered, preaching at Lynn's First Methodist Episcopal Church in December 1843, listen to what the Reverend James Porter bemoaned about the holiday. He said, quote, of such days we have a few now, and sad days they are for morality. Instead of temperance and peace, there will be quarreling, fighting, and debauchery. Instead of righteousness, there will be sin. Instead of the triumph of heaven, there'll be the triumph of hell. That's his description of Christmas. It could have been in response to this attitude that Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote in his journal on December 25th, 1856, quote, "Not a very Merry Christmas. We are in a transition state here in New England. The old Puritan feeling prevents it from being a cheerful, hearty holiday, though every year makes it so." So he's noting it's changing, but it's taking time. A rowdy Christmas did not disappear. A domestic Santa did not obliterate other modes of celebrating the holiday. But a new view emerges, which portrays Christmas, as you see in this Winslow Homer illustration, as a family event. Quote, "Christmas also has a tendency to refine the feelings and give domestic life a peculiar charm. It concentrates all our enjoyments in the domestic circle," as you can see here, with the patriots of the family in the center and younger people in games, children, blind man's buff, and other things going on in this very busy scene. Gleason's pictorial in 1853 wrote, "Christmas is heralded as an occasion for mutual good feelings, family gatherings, and the exercise of those charities so blessed in the sight of heaven." Now, historian Stephen Nissenbaum wrote, "Religion failed to transform Christmas from a season of misrule into a quieter pleasure. It was the religion of domesticity that would be represented at Christmas time. And it was during this period in the 19th century, the attitude towards children and childhood changed. It now became a special time. The central purpose of the family was not only to provide for the instruction of children, but also their happiness." And here we go. Now, even at mid-century, it was still a work week, but this too was changing. And you can see this, they're actually advertising, this is a little bit later, that, this is strange. The post office is going to be closed. E. Warren Mudge in 1847 recorded in his diary, quote, "Day more generally observed than usual. A large proportion of places, businesses being closed by previous arrangement with the city." So he's saying, gee, it's strange. Stores are closing on Christmas Day. Now, the day in New England becomes a holiday in Connecticut. That's the first state in 1845. Massachusetts was second to last. And that was in 1856. But you should remember, it does not become a national holiday until 1870. So I mentioned Santa was no stranger. He had a busy schedule attending church fairs. He could be found at numerous retail establishments as well. And in 1849, I found the following announcement in the Lynn News. Quote, "The venerable old Santa Claus announces to his friends that he's concluded to take up his residence at the Old Curiosity Shop during the Christmas and New Year holidays, where he would be happy to see any of his young friends and to furnish them with almost anything they might want, both useful and ornamental." And here it comes, "at very low prices." So we talk about, oops, I'm sorry, I keep doing that. We talk about the commercialization of the holiday. It was there from the beginning. The ad you're looking at the top is from Salem, Mass. In very early 1806. The one on the bottom was republished from a Boston paper in 1839 in Lynn. So as the popularity of the holiday began to grow, businesses began advertising their wares. The earliest advertisements referred to New Year's gifts as often as Christmas. In these early advertisements, the seeds of the commercialization of the holiday were sown. Such holiday customs as the Christmas tree and Santa Claus, intimately connected as they both are with gift giving, might not have flourished to the extent they did without some economic impetus. And that was because for the first time, mass production of inexpensive goods brought large-scale consumption within the reach of the general public. And you can just look at this ad, just see the variety of things that were being offered, both new and cheap. Not slow to take advantage of the opportunities presented to them. And as you see, Lots of ads there. And on the ad on the left, you can see about 2/3 down, juvenile books. Books were on the cutting edge of a commercial Christmas, making up more than half of the earliest items advertised as Christmas gifts, writes historian Stephen Nissenbaum. Publishers came up with a new product you see on the right, a new literary genre known as a gift books. These gift books were designed for age groups and different age groups and could consist entirely of poetry. They might be a compilation of stories and essays. Some were humorous, but they were designed to be used as gifts. And here's another example of one. And here I just want to mention briefly, I mentioned earlier the female abolitionist societies. And at the Boston Fair, they published a book for almost the entire existence of the fairs called the Liberty Bell, based on the symbol from the Revolution, Liberty Bell. Major authors contributed, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, to this gift book, which was sold at the fair. But they weren't the only gifts. Here on the left, you see a doll that belonged to Helen Worsby from Washington, Connecticut, in the early part of the 20th century. And there's the photo of Helen having a tea party with her sister Irma, enjoying a tea with her favorite doll, as you see there. And this is a piece that's in the collection. I just want to show you a couple of the items that were being given as gifts that we know of. This is a jumping jack that was given to Edith Longfellow from Santa in 1853. Now, although New Year's Day continued to be mentioned, the major gift-giving day had shifted to Christmas by the 1850s. Popular gifts for children, you can see some here, included sleds, books, dolls, and backgammon. On the right, well, adults could get rattan furniture, of course. Now, we think we go crazy about Christmas shopping. Ellen Lyman wrote in her journal on December 23rd, 1866, quote, "Off early this morning to buy Abby's cuckoo clock, afterwards to McCarthy's to buy greens, home to dinner, and directly out again to buy 14 more presents. Finished at last at 6:30, having bought 147 presents since Tuesday afternoon." That was 5 days. So again, the commercialization, the craziness has been there from the beginning. Christmas shopping involved planning not just for presents, but for the holiday feast as well. And I love this trade card from Boston of Santa throwing the plum puddings down the chimney. You know, do they get cooked as they go down? It's turkey, and you can see them in this. Frank is Leslie's here in Boston being hanging for Christmas. Turkeys secured a place as the roast of choice for Christmas. The success of the meal, however, could distinctly vary. In 1860, Emor and Mudge turkey was, quote, "done to a nicety," while in 1863, it was, quote, "very tough." Here's another image. This is from Washington, Connecticut, showing you again the turkeys that were hanging outside along with Christmas greens that could be purchased for the holiday. Betsy Brickett Clark of Plastow, New Hampshire noted, "We had a splendid dinner, turkeys, ducks, pudding pies, and fruit." Now, an amusing glimpse of the holiday, how the holiday was celebrated among the late Victorians, can be found in Ingles' Home and Art magazine. Daunting, especially to the novice hostess, were the 3 full pages devoted to carving a turkey. And they begin with this dire warning, quote, "Let no lady embarrass the carver and herself by placing before him a fowl with joints so unyielding that every effort to separate them endangers the adjacent guests with an instantaneous visitation from His Majesty the turkey, and proclaim louder than words her unskillful cuisine." Now, not everyone had turkey. Phoebe Bede Clark of Lynn, for her Christmas dinner of 1864, prepared chickens, roast lamb, plum pudding, and donuts. And just to show you a couple of images of Christmas feasts, And you wouldn't know this is necessarily Christmas, except it's marked on the back, Christmas Day. This is the Day family of Lynn, Massachusetts. And if you do look closely in the center, you can see a plum pudding right there. So that kind of gives it away here. Now, this is, very much middle class, working class family in Lynn. And you want to contrast this with this family in Springfield, Massachusetts, quite different, around 1900. And I also want you to look at the lavish settings and also notice what's hanging from the light fixture, but electric lights that would sometimes go on a tree. More about that later. Okay. Now, there's the turkey again, and there's that plum pudding. Children expected culinary treats in their stockings as well, and Clapp's Confectionery obliged with, quote, a large stock of sugar toys and confectionaries, shell barks, chestnuts, fresh baked peanuts with pears, apples, dates, and figs. And of course, you see the sugar plums here. Now, I want to go, where do they expect these? Well, I want to talk a little bit about stockings. This is actually a very early illustration that the New York Historical Society did in 1810. It shows you St. Nicholas, but I want you to look at the image on the right where you can see the stockings actually hanging down from the fireplace. Those actually are an adoption of a Dutch tradition. And as I said earlier, we're adapting and making our own. This is that 1821 poem I mentioned. And again, you see the stockings. This is from Clement C. Moore's illustrations, tiny stockings there by the bed. And a little bit bigger stocking. This is another from Harper's illustration from Harper's. Rose Terry of Hartford found in her stocking in 1834 a dollar bill, a quarter of a dollar, a book, and a paper of raisins, and wrote, "I think St. Nicholas was very generous." So Christmas stockings are actually another earlier tradition that survives. And I want to go on and, well, I'm going to show you this slide here. In Portland on May 24th, 1850, Anne Longfellow Pierce wrote to Mary Longfellow Greenleaf, quote, "Santa Claus has done his mission in Hen's room. The full stockings dangle at the bedside, ready for this, the dawn of day." Later on, you could get your stocking already stuffed from Sears and Roebuck. The item on the right is in our collection at Historic New England. Now, following the Christmas dinner, the tree and the presents, people often spent the evening attending a musical or theatrical presentation, or as you can see here quite early, a Christmas ball in 1802. Now, Christmas Day performances with seasonal themes can be found, but in many cases, and as you can see one here quite later in Vermont, not all of them did. If you look at this ad, and this is from Lynn, Massachusetts, many did not have that Christmas theme. It says Christmas night. You're going to the play and theater and you're seeing Honeymoon or How to Rule a Wife or the splendid drama Adopted Child. So no Christmas themes. Now, Yankee sensibilities kept these affairs quiet, but in New York and Philadelphia, newspaper accounts show that more often than not, these were rowdy affairs. And I just show you one example. Kris Kringle's Rare Show, this is in Philadelphia, 1845. And if you look at it, you see those elements of misrule where the kids are pushing in here. And if you look closely at the image on the right, in the very bottom left, you can see a little girl crying. And on the bottom right, you can see a boy making noise with the trumpet. Newspaper accounts show people literally breaking down doors in areas of New York, begging, that old tradition, for drink, food, or a gift, money, or they would not leave. So this is what the Knickerbockers in New York and others were trying to get away from by making it a domestic holiday. Now, the outbreak of the Civil War did little to dampen the growing enthusiasm for Christmas. In 1861, the Lynn Semi-Weekly Reporter noted, Notwithstanding the pressures of the time and the fact that the nation is deeply involved in a war for its existence, the people of this city, and we presume the same may be said of other places, seem to enjoy the Merry Christmas as much as ever. And here you see Santa Claus, not in his traditional costume, but in the stars and stripes. And here's a little detail, bringing gifts like a jack-in-a-box and other needed goods to the soldiers. Away serving in the 9th Massachusetts Volunteer, Lynn soldier J.E. Hodgkins noted in his 1862 diary, "We are not forgotten. God has put into the hearts of some kind ladies of Washington," he was in D.C., "to look after us today, for which we are very thankful. They furnished a splendid dinner to us, to which we have done ample justice." Now, and here you can see gifts coming to the soldiers, the Christmas box with the homemade stockings and so on. So they were not forgotten. Ingles' Home and Art magazine echoed another theme which reoccurred in the late 19th century commentary on the holiday. To eat, drink, and be merry is not the real keeping of the season, the true spirit of Christmas, but to befriend others less fortunate than ourselves or less happily circumstanced, to make some real sacrifice, perchance, for the happiness of another. And if you look at this image, this woman in her finery is coming out holding a package, notice the package, to these children who are in raggedy clothes, bare feet in the snow. That's going to be popularized in literature and in illustrations. You see the rich man's Christmas with the abundance at the top and the meager poor man's Christmas at the bottom. Of course, that's all going to be popularized by Dickens in his 1843 A Christmas Carol. Okay, who can tell me where Dickens did his first reading of A Christmas Carol? Yes, very good. Harker House, excellent. And he did it all across the country. So this is a popular theme. And here in this broadside or poster from Duxbury, Mass., you can see the town hall on December 24th is having things to sell, but the proceeds are actually going to go to feed the hungry and clothe the naked. It says it right there on the broadside there. Now, two aspects of the late Victorian holiday, remembrance of the poor and increasingly elaborate displays and consumption, existed side by side. Many did generously remember the poor, but that did not guarantee that there would not be excessiveness at your private celebrations. And you can see that in this Chapman illustration. In 1903, school teacher Luther Atwood's son, Joseph, had, quote, about 30 presents at the tree exercises. And Atwood himself never personally ate so much or felt so uncomfortable. Sound familiar? The 1870s, moving on, saw a few new additions to the Christmas celebrations. The Christmas card was popularized in America in 1875 after enjoying steadily growing popularity in England in the 1840s. What you're looking at is the very first Christmas card produced in England. It's the printer's proof at the top. It was commissioned by Sir Henry Cole and designed by John Colcutt Horsley in England. These next two images, and they're still kind of a mystery, printed in Boston, we know, and I want you to look at both of them. These are now considered the first two Christmas cards, but they weren't used, or at least this one was not used in Boston. This was sent out by Pisa's Variety Store and Temple of Fancy in Albany in 1851. And this one, which is basically the same image but reversed, is from the same date. This one belongs to the Winterthur Museum. And you see this family there with a servant, actually an African-American servant in the back. So these are now considered the first two Christmas cards. But it's this fellow, Louis Prang from Germany, who is credited with popularizing the Christmas card. And these early ones I want you to look at are very simple floral designs. And here you go. Strike you about these? Or those? Or how about a dead bird, right? not very Christmassy. So what's going to happen is that the imagery that we associate with Christmas is going to evolve over time with Christmas cards. Prang saw his cards as works of art, holding competitions in New York and employing major artists. He found that his larger size cards like this with the fringe and this sold much better. It was not till somewhat later, but what we consider Christmas imagery became used and became standard. People still did do their own cards. Historic New England owns the Sarah Orne Jewett House, the author. This is a card that she made of her house in South Berwick, Maine, now our museum. You know, they could be humorous. They could reflect their time. What decade were these done? Give me a guess. 20s, right? Maybe early 30s. Exactly. So Christmas cards very much reflect the period when they're done. They adopt, to technology and become humorous. I love them. Speaking of adopting to technology, photo Christmas cards, right, become popular starting in the early 20th century, but it's really post-World War II. That is me, and my Santa Claus is coming out. I still have that Santa Claus on our family chimney that will be coming out any day now. So photo Christmas cards are very popular today. Very, very popular if you still get them. And let's talk a little about letters to Santa. They become popular in the 1870s. Another Thomas Nast. I want you to look at the piles. The one on the left is for naughty boys and girls, and that little pile on the right is for good boys and girls. Yeah. And we actually own one in our collection, Historic New England. This is from Stephen Phillips of Chestnut Street, Mass., who in that letter, not very good handwriting, requests from Santa an Indian costume and a carriage. Well, he must have been a very good little boy because there he is in his costume, and we still own the carriage at the Phillips house on Chestnut Street. Letters to Santa become very popular, as you can see in these images from different places in New England. Now, the later years of the 19th century saw the elaboration and adapting of existing holiday trends. And oops, what does that mean? Well, it means floor to ceiling Christmas trees, as you can see here in this image. I mentioned earlier about Christmas presents and wrapping. As you can see, Santa's bringing them unwrapped. In the mid-19th century, if there was any wrapping, it would be simple white, brown paper with maybe a ribbon. That's it. That's from the Lexington Historical. That's appropriate. It's not until later that we get printed papers, which become popular in the 20th century. And again, it's a New England firm that popularizes and sells this. We adapt to technology. Okay, so our Christmas lights on our tree, no longer candles, but electric lights. But as you saw in that earlier picture, you could also hang them from your chandelier and decorate your table with Christmas lights. Okay. Now, in 1889, something big happens to Santa Claus. I hope you didn't see that too much. Anyone know what happened? Something big happens. He got married. Yes, in 1889. Well, I like to joke he gets married because Mrs. Santa Claus makes her first appearance when Catherine Lee Bates of Falmouth, Massachusetts, created the character in her book, Goody Santa Claus, her booklet. So before, no Santa Claus. He just hung around with elves. Now, outdoor displays get more elaborate and extensive. This is the first national Christmas tree done by a New Englander in 1923. Who? Thank you. Right. And here we have one from the Boston Common. So decorating of shop windows becomes popular. This is Macy's mechanized Christmas window from 1884. People still enjoy them. Some of you might remember Jordan Marsh, a downtown crossing, which had extensive displays. And people look forward to them every year. If you went to Jordan Marsh, you could also go up to the Enchanted Village. And there you could have your picture taken with Santa Claus. That's me with the tie, and my little brother Warren, who does not look very happy. This was for people who grew up in this area, a real treat. Look forward to it every year. And it now has been refurbished and survives at Jordan's Furniture. So I went to see it a couple years ago. It's still magic. In the 20th century, the commercialization of the holiday seems to have grown, and the selling of the holiday seems to come earlier every year. Santa was co-opted by manufacturers to appear as a salesman. One newspaper headline I saw read, and you probably have seen this: Halloween and it's Christmas everywhere. Well, we just got over Halloween and we were already on to Christmas this year. Shopping has already changed with online sales, cutting into more traditional. And you remember the big thing, not since COVID, but of stores opening up on Thanksgiving Day. And that was a big change. And of course, we just lived through Cyber Monday and Giving Tuesday. And again, we're adapting. You can go online and get letters from Santa Claus sent to your grandchildren, your children, whoever you want. Or I use Jackie Lawson Christmas cards, animated cards, so that's a change, adaption. Another one that came about was the artificial Christmas tree. They were first imported, as you might guess, from Germany in the 1890s, and they were made, as this one is, of ostrich feathers. The artificial tree was not manufactured in the United States until after the 1900s. In the 1930s, the Ash Brush Company created the first artificial brush trees using the same machinery that made their toilet brushes. Some of you may have seen or experienced these kinds of Christmas trees. We were talking about that early. These companies later invented the silver-colored metallic type artificial Christmas tree that became popular in the 50s. And they had the revolving lights. And there you see one of those metallic trees. And I promise that is almost the last picture of me you'll see. That's me with my mother at my Uncle Anthony's Christmas tree. Okay, so other things that happen. Giving to the poor or the needy is something that continues. Christmas, here you see the Salvation, which was founded in London in 1865. There are some purely 20th century additions to the festivities, one being Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, who makes his first appearance in a Montgomery Ward booklet as a gift to customers in 1940. And it was later popularized in a song by, anyone know? Who? He wrote the book, but not who popularized the song. Gene Autry. I'm not going to hold you. Gene Autry. So also, Christmas stamps are a big thing, but the first one doesn't come out until 1962. This is the very first Christmas stamp. So our traditions or customs adapt, change. This is a good example of one that celebrates, I believe, from December 26th through January 1, African traditions, Kwanzaa, a newly created celebration that comes in the 20th century. So I hoped in this presentation you can see how our Christmas has changed and adapted over time. From this in 1923 in Lexington to this today, right? Now, I want to say lots of our our towns where we grow up or where we live have local celebrations and traditions. Mine does a Santa parade on Nahant. That's what you're looking at here. This is when I did this talk up in Woodstock. I was there for Wassail Weekend in Woodstock, Vermont, which is great fun. Of course, in your own Maine, you have to have lobster traps to do your Christmas tree. And this is in Kennebunk. Santa comes in on what else but a lobster boat, right? Of course he does. And there are some, local traditions in Boston. This one started in 2000 with 5 guys. Now it has over 700 men and women, and they've helped to raise over 1.6 million for local children. And it's the Santa Speedo Run. And that's me in the middle. No, just kidding. Okay, no more pictures of me. I wish. It'll be interesting to see what the 21st century brings in terms of adaptations to the holiday festivities. One thing for certain is that the holiday will adapt as it always has. So I hope you saw that. And I want to end this presentation with a quote from an 1877 newspaper that seems to capture the feeling we have for the holiday even to this day. The observance of Christmas has become so universal in this country now that the day is regarded as the holiday of the year. Thanksgiving Day has had a succumbent importance to the festival, and even the glorious 4th has taken a back seat when compared with the 25th of December. Christmas is the day in which mirth and revelry is to be crowned as king and queen. So raise your Christmas trees, hang up your fairest of wreaths, sing your merriest songs, brush away all dark clouds, let in the sunshine, beckon happiness into the front window, while unhappiness is bowed out at the back door. And in a word, let all do everything in their power to ensure for themselves and others a Merry Christmas. So let me be the first to wish you all a Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. Thank you. Okay. Okay, that's good. Yeah, that's a good question. Where did Kris Kringle come from? So in the early years of Santa Claus development, you see people using the term St. Nicholas. You see Santa Claus come in. You hear Kris Kringle. I see that more in the Pennsylvania, New York region as opposed to New England, but they all seem to get used and get intermingled. But Santa Claus clearly becomes the dominant phrase that we use to describe the gentleman with the big belly. Yes. Yes. Knock on the front door. So why did Santa Claus go through the chimney? Why did Santa Claus go through the chimney? What is the origin of it? I have to say that that's a really good question. I can tell you that in Clemency Moore's poem, he's going down the chimney. And I'm going to have to go back and check that 1821 poem to see if he's going down the chimney there. And it's a good question. I can say it was there early on, but what are the origins of it? I have to go and do some research. Peter, you have any ideas? We have another expert here.
Only that,
Peter says it becomes a very vivid image in the 19th century. So I know it's there from Clemency Moore's poem, which really did a lot. I mean, that was a major influence on popularizing Santa Claus. Okay, mistletoe and Krampus. Okay, so I'm focusing in on America, but I have been looking at European traditions. The Krampus did not really make it over to America in any big way at all. So Krampus was kind of like where Santa, although he could carry a switch in some European traditions, Krampus was sort of the bad guy. You know, he could steal children. He could harm children. If you weren't good, you didn't want to get involved with Krampus at all. But that's really a European. Some of my friends who had that wonderful candlelit tree did have, when they were growing up in Austria, Krampus did come around and he was really frightening to children. And that was part of their counterpart to the good was the bad. And the other question was about mistletoe. And mistletoe, so the greenery, the custom of mistletoe, I know for a fact, British, the British were using the mistletoe as a symbol because of, you know, it's green. The whole greenery thing is it's green when other plants have died. in the winter. And it was Why the Kissing? That was more in Britain, but it did obviously happen here. It got glommed onto us here. And I can't tell you exactly why. Wish I could tell you more. Good question. I'm going to have to go and look it up.
1800s, in the early 1800s, Christianity did not agree with the birth of Christ on the 25th. Now we have nativity scenes, and it's commonly accepted that Christianity and sermons and preachers come around to accepting that, and then preaching that's what happened.
Oh, that's a really good question. And I'm going to need some help here. Peter, do you remember when the church, it was the church who decided that December 25th was the birthday of Christ. The church proclaimed that. And when I say the church, originally it was the Catholic Church, but then it was the other religions that went along with that. But as you saw in that early period, there were people saying, the Bible doesn't say it. It's December 25th at all. So that had to be, that grows in acceptance too. Even though the church had earlier, I believe, said it was December 25th, there were holdouts who still said, the Bible doesn't say this, so we can't do it. Well, actually, that's a really good question. So no, it's before sending. Denison's was the name of the company in Massachusetts and Maine that created them. What you started to see at department stores was that simple wrapping that I showed you. And with the growth of department stores, they would put stickers on them before we went to full wrapping paper, but it wasn't necessarily having anything to do with the shipping, as far as I know. Research I found. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Everyone online.